What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you your favorite weekly series, the Top Pokemon Card Auctions of the Week recap. Folks, today we'll be covering auctions across multiple platforms, including a lot of raw card sales, a lot of high-end trophy card sales, and everything in between. I am so glad you tuned in. Stay tuned to the very end. You're gonna love today's recap. And of course, today's recap is sponsored by the #1 website for high-end Pokemon card investments, lowpopping.com. If you are a collector of PSA, BGS, or CGC graded Pokemon cards, lowpopping.com has an absolute plethora of high-end grails available for you. And even though they specialize in high-end cards, they also have several very affordable cards for sale as well. And remember, one of the best things about lowpopping.com is if you don't have the cash on hand, you can very easily trade for the item or items that you must have for your collection. And if you see something you like, you can shoot them an offer, as you can make offers on just about anything you see. Lowpopping.com is a must for anyone in the market for Pokemon cards, Yu-Gi-Oh cards, or even sealed video games. Check out their website. A link will be in the description of this video. Thank you so much for your support. All right, folks, I got a lot of interesting auctions for you. Let's start off with some Journey Together. Let's take a look at the sealed product that's been selling before it's even been officially released. Here we have a Journey Together Elite Trainer box. And this is not the Pokemon Center version that sold in auction for $145.50. And then we saw a pre-sale of a regular booster box that sold for $227.50. And then we saw an enhanced Journey Together box sell for $280. Absolutely wild prices for pre-sales for a Pokemon card set if I've ever seen them. Up next, we have this very interesting lot of sealed Gold Star Greninjas from the Celebration Elite Trainer boxes. There are a total, I believe, of 97 sealed Greninja promos that sold for a grand total of $1,469 US, and that's about $15 per promo, which, I mean, I told you to get them back when they were $3 a sealed promo, but if you didn't, 15 bucks a promo is not too bad in today's market. These Gold Star Greninjas have really skyrocketed, especially as PSA 10s. And then we also saw a lot of 168 Mew EX gold medal cards from the 151 UPCs that sold for a grand total of $1,125, which would be about $7 per promo, so not too bad either. I got some more raw card sales for you. Here, folks, is a Latios GX Alt Art from Team Up. This raw copy sold for $1,620. And what's crazy to me is even in the subtitle of this listing, it says it has a crease at the top of it. I'm assuming it's like right there. It's kind of hard to tell by these photos, but if Probstein's listing that it has a crease, it must be there. So yeah, it's crazy because if you grade this card with a crease in it at all, you're looking at, I don't know, a 6 or less for most grading companies, I would think. That's crazy. And then we saw this raw copy of the Umbreon EX from Prismatic Evolutions sell for $1,740. Meanwhile, the raw copies of the Moonbreon VMAX have been selling for about $1,200, while the PSA 10 copies have sold for around $2,176. Up next, we have the complete Japanese 151 Master Ball set in this binder here. I guess it includes every single card, all of the non-holos, the reverse holos, the master balls, all the special cards, everything. 100% complete, sold for $3,350. That is pretty awesome. On to some graded cards on eBay. We saw several cards from the XY era. Here is a Gyarados from Ancient Origins, sold as a PSA 10 for $440. Here we have a Mega Charizard EX from Generations, sold as a PSA 10 for $828. Here is a Full Art Alakazam EX from Fates Collide. This is a secret rare card that sold for $1,300. And then lastly, we have this Holo Charizard from XY Evolutions, sold as a PSA 10 for $1,813. And this is a card that was selling about a month or so ago for about $1,200. And lastly, for our modern cards, we have this lot of Mario Pikachu, Mario Luigi cards, all of them in PSA 10, sold for $16,100 this week. On to some awesome vintage cards. Here we have a first edition base set Venusaur, graded a PSA 10 and sold for $12,877. From Jungle, we saw a first edition Jolteon sell for $2,555. Here also from Jungle was this first edition Scyther that sold for $1,691. From Fossil, we saw a first edition Aerodactyl sell for $1,243, along with this first edition Moltres Holo that sold for $1,488. And then we saw the very elusive PSA 10 first edition Articuno sell for $3,211. Here is a Misty's Gyarados from Gym Challenge that sold for $1,355. From the Neo series, we saw this Neo Discovery first edition Caesar that sold for $3,889. And then from Neo Destiny, we saw this Unlimited Dark Espeon sell as a PSA 10 for $1,691. A couple of Shining cards came through. Here is a Shining Gyarados in PSA 10 with a brand new cert on it, sold for $14,650 this week. And then here we saw the first edition Shining Tyranitar that sold for $5,800. We also saw a couple of amazing sales from the E-Series. Here is a Skyridge Holo Gyarados that sold for $3,200. And then we saw two of these Gengar Holos from Skyridge. This one got the Tag 10 grade and sold for $9,600, while a PSA 10 copy sold for $12,850. This is one of the most expensive Gengars of all time. From EX Dragon, we saw this Charizard Holo sell for $2,325. From EX Team Rocket Returns, here is a Rockets Articuno that sold for $2,236. From Deoxys, we saw this Rayquaza EX sell for $4,350. And then we saw a couple pieces of sealed product on eBay. Here is an XY Base Elite Trainer box that sold for $1,831. A lot of the Elite Trainer boxes from the Black and White era and the XY era can go for some big bucks. Speaking of big bucks, here is a sealed Team Up booster box that sold for, I think, another new record price of $4,455 this week. No doubt the most expensive Sun and Moon set of all time. And lastly, on eBay, we saw this first edition base set booster pack featuring the Charizard artwork. I believe this pack did weigh pretty light, and it sold for $4,700 this week. On to some auctions from Alt. We saw this Black Label 2019 Sun and Moon Dream League Clefairy that sold for $3,120, along with this Black Label Japanese Charizard EX from Shiny Treasure EX that sold for $2,586. Here we have a first edition Giovanni's Gyarados from Gym Challenge that sold for $1,410. And then we saw all three of the Techno Evolutions from the Top Chrome series. The Techno cards are the most valuable and rarest ones to get from Topps Chrome. Here's a PSA 10 Jolteon that sold for $4,807. A PSA 10 Flareon sold for $4,864. And the Vaporeon sold for the most, as it usually does, selling for $5,741. And then we saw this Sparkle Topps Chrome Gengar that sold for $8,026 as a PSA 10. Here is a PSA 9 Japanese 600-point fan club promo Magikarp that sold for $7,598. And then we also saw this PSA 9 University Magikarp prize card sell for $19,666. And lastly, on Alt, we saw this Japanese Rayquaza Gold Star that graded a PSA 10 and was also autographed. And the autograph rated a PSA 10 as well, and it sold for $20,250. On to the weekly and monthly premiere auction block from Fanatics Collect. We saw another Shining Gyarados in PSA 10. This one sold for $13,800. Here is a 1995 Japanese Top Sun Charizard, sold as a PSA 10 for $22,800. A couple of modern CGC 10 cards came through. Here is a CGC 10 Pristine Charizard GX from Hidden Fates, sold for $990. Here is a CGC 10 Lugia V that sold for $1,050. Here is a Pristine 10 Mew EX from Paldean Fates, sold for $1,140. And then we saw the CGC 10 Giratina V Alt Art from Lost Origin that sold for $1,920. Here is a BGS 10 Black Label Greninja and Zoroark GX from Unbroken Bonds that sold for $1,230. And then a Black Label Japanese Umbreon EX came by. from Terrestrial Festival, sold for $7,200. We saw this unlimited Lapras holo from Fossil Set that graded a PSA 10. Quite difficult card to grade, sold for $1,590. Here is a CGC10 pristine base set unlimited Charizard that sold for $9,600. And then here we saw a black label Mario Pikachu. This one is not the full art version, but it's still sold for $12,600. Here's a PSA 10 Japanese Gold Star Charizard that sold for $16,200. Here's a PSA 10 Black Star promo Ash Greninja EX that sold for $11,100. Here is a PSA 10 Japanese promo 8600 point Daisuke Club Master Scroll card that sold for $17,400. Also in the premiere auction, we saw this PSA 10 Box Topper Reverse Holo Charizard from Legendary Collection, sold for an even $18,000. And the final auction in this week's recap would have to be the PSA 9 First Appearance Lugia from Topps, sold for $19,200. Only 3 PSA 9s of this card exist. There are 0 PSA 10s. Thank you so much for watching, folks. It means more to me than you know. I appreciate it. Leave a comment below. That's all I got for you today, and I'll catch you all in my next one.